Radio Cayman,
The voice,
the heart, the soul of the Cayman Islands.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome once again to Money Sense. I'm Simon Caudry and I have the pleasure of hosting this morning's show and welcoming back Georgie Loxton. Good morning again, Georgie.
Good morning, Simon.
It has been since February since we last saw you, and there's been a few things that have happened in that time, haven't there?
Well, it's been a bit of a wild year, that's for sure.
Yes. Markets, how would you, politely, how would you describe the state of markets at the moment?
Well, we're down.
Okay,
Put it that way.
That's polite.
But that's quite normal in
Okay.
stock markets, of course. When you own bits of businesses, the long-term trend is always up. But to get that long-term return, you have to go through periods like this. And
Yeah.
it's not abnormal for the market to be down between 20 and 30%. That happens roughly once every 4 or 5 years, going back through history. But what has been a bit unusual this year is that normally when the stock market's down, that is when you've owned the pieces of the businesses are down, you're normally buffered by what we call the bonds, which is what you own when you've lent money to the business, which is the kind of stable, buffery part of the portfolio, the ballast of a portfolio, if you like. But this year, what we've seen, which is really unusual, is the bond market down historically more than it's ever been down at the same time that the stock market's down.
Are you going to start throwing correlations at me now?
No.
Okay, good. It's too early in the morning for advanced maths, I suppose. But I think you hit on a point there, which is that a lot of people, and preparing for this show, I was talking to a number of people, the questions they might have for you. And I think one of the key things that concerns people is that they look at their statement and nothing's doing well. And that's always quite scary. At least in times past, you'd look at your statement and, as you say, your investments in the tech sector might have gone horribly wrong, but at least your investments in the consumer staples sector, or your bond investments, or your gold investment, or whatever it might have been, that's sort of held up a little bit. So yes, okay, you're down 20, 25 here, but you might be up 2 or 3% there, and it helps averaging things. So what's so unique about this particular cycle then?
Well, we've had the Fed. The Fed's raising rates, and they're raising rates really quickly, and that's had huge impacts across all sorts of different asset classes. And I think the pace of it has come as a bit of a surprise to people. We had another big rate rise yesterday, and and we don't really know when they're going to stop.
Well, don't finish that sentence there. Don't leave
Do
us.
you know when they're going to stop, Simon?
Next year. Let's go with next year.
Yeah.
Just don't know at what level, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, they'll certainly stop at some point when they've either killed the economy,
Yeah.
or inflation has been shown to be under control, won't they?
But they have to do it. They're doing the right thing. I mean,
Do you think they're doing the right thing too late?
Probably.
Do you think we? Well, it's a hypothetical, I suppose, but we've gone on for how long has it been? 4 or 5 years, basically, longer actually, hasn't it? Of this low interest rate regime, and people have thought of money as being free and put it into all sorts of asset classes, and now we're sort of seeing the hangover after, in essence, a jolly long party.
Absolutely. And we could have predicted it, of course, if you look back in hindsight. I'm not an economist, Simon, and commenting on what the economy is going to do next is really a bit of a fool's errand, even for an economist.
Wow.
And
You're calling economists fools?
Well, nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we have to admit as investors.
That's true. Well, you touched on the Fed, though, raising interest rates, and there's a reason they're raising interest rates, which is inflation is, shall we say, pseudo out of control. It's out of control, out of the bounds of what the Fed certainly would want it to be. But in this particular show, and with your background as a financial advisor and giving people financial planning advice, inflation's a real problem for them on a personal level, because the things that they're buying are becoming incredibly expensive. So how do you counsel people to address this and to manage through this problem?
Well, I think there's lots of nuance to it, actually, because inflation impacts different people really differently. Some people aren't feeling the impacts in the same way as others are. I mean, if you own a home and it's paid off, for example, you're feeling inflation very differently to someone who might be renting and is subject to rents going up. Likewise, it depends on your savings rate a lot as well as to how you're feeling the effects of inflation. And in Cayman, we're such a strange economy here in some ways. We don't operate in the same way, I don't think, as many other places. And we're a bit bubbly, aren't we?
Yeah.
And are people feeling it? Absolutely. I mean, things have got more expensive. We know that when you walk into the supermarket. But things have always been expensive here. So in a way, I think people feel it differently to how they do if they're in the US. But, you know, there's some obvious ways you can deal with inflation. You can
Sorry, just to interrupt if I may there, because I think you almost got to a nuance which I wanted to probe a little bit more on, which is different people have different experiences of inflation. And it seems to me as though your point about people who own their homes and have paid them off, it's almost as though this particular bout of inflation is going to affect the poorer elements of our community, particularly in Cayman, than it will the richer elements. And so then it becomes even more pressing as to, well, what's the response that these people in that stage of the community who may be earning $50,000-$60,000 as opposed to the lawyers and such like on $200,000-$400,000.
Absolutely, Simon, you're totally right, because that's the evil of inflation, in that it does impact those people more than, you know, the rich and the wealthy.
And particularly given the food price inflation that we've seen, where it's a high percentage of a basket of goods that somebody on $50,000 might spend versus someone on $200,000. So what's the advice that you give these people?
Well, I mean, I think there's various different parts of your financial life that you can look at. You can look at what you're spending, of course, and you can try and get smart about what you're spending. You can buy in bulk. You can look at all your subscriptions and cancel subscriptions. You can call up all your service providers and ask what the best plan is and can you reduce your costs across those kind of expenses.
How many of us, for instance, have kept the same phone company for 15 years without ever finding out whether another one's a better option?
Totally, Simon. You can make a couple of phone calls and often reduce those costs quite a lot. And we don't do it in normal times, but people can do that. And you'd be amazed what happens if you call up and say, hey, I need a cheaper plan. What's your best plan? Should I be on it? And you do that across, you know, the various different phone providers and all the rest of it. But then you can also look at what you're earning, of course, as the spending and then the earning. And in some ways, what you're earning is much easier to adjust than what you're spending, because there gets to a point when you can't actually reduce your expenditure anymore because you have to go to the supermarket and buy food and you have to live. Whereas people actually have much more control over what they're earning than they think. And there are ways that people... Well, we've all got the ability to go out and earn money. There's not a limited amount of money on this planet. You can go and earn really what you want. You've just got to find a way to do it. And there are a gazillion ways to do that in the economy that we live in and the world that we live in today with technology. There are all sorts of side hustles you can start. You can go out and you can get a new accreditation or get a new certificate of some kind in whatever field it is in order to get that promotion. You can sit down and you can negotiate a pay rise. I mean, there are all sorts of things. You can look at your home and figure out how you can make your home work for you. There are lots of ways that people can do it. And there's so many incredible resources online to figure out how to go about making more money.
Is that it seems or feels to me, as you say, that it feels difficult to do, though?
Absolutely. But the good stuff is difficult, isn't it? And it's very easy to sort of sit and say, well, I'm stuck at earning $50,000 a year. I'll never earn more. But who says you can't earn more?
It's about just taking that risk, in a sense.
Absolutely. It's only your mind that tells you can't earn more money.
Well, there's.
Sorry, we're getting deep there, aren't we?
Metaphysical at this time in the morning. My mind might be incapable of such wise thoughts at such an early hour. Okay, so you're saying that one angle is potentially to think about ways of earning more money, and there are different. So there are some ways of doing proofreading and such like, and doing sort of selling your services by the hour for whether it be marketing creation or whatever those skills are. Mm-hmm. And then on the saving side, well, as you say, there's only a limited capacity. What other things should people be thinking about? Is at this time, given where we are in markets, investing? I mean, what do you make of that?
Absolutely. I mean, then you look at cash. If you are sitting with cash in the bank and you think it feels really nice and really safe, well, it does in the short term, of course, because cash is subject to no volatility. You log onto your bank account, and if you haven't spent anything, you've kind of got the same amount there as you had last month. Yeah. But every month and every year, that money is buying you less because the cost of the stuff that you need to buy is going up. So we call that purchasing power, what you can actually buy with your money. And that's going down, and it's going down really quickly right now because inflation is high. So, we always say to people, it's not about the number of units of currency that you have. It's about what you can buy with that number of units of currency. And if that's going down by 12% a year, that's really, really risky. That's not safe. That's an incredibly risky thing to do with your money.
It seems to me from talking to people that a lot of people in Cayman have their money in a bank account, in, say, a current account or a checking account, as I think we call it in North America, whereas there are equivalent accounts, even a savings account. Now, by no means is that going to pay you 12%, but it's going to pay you perhaps 4.5%, whereas a checking account is paying you exactly 0. Or you could invest in the money in a money market, which will pay you 4.5%, 5%. So there are ways of grading from 0 to 4
Yes.
with no additional risk.
Absolutely. And that wasn't the case this time last year because
Interest rates were at 0.
because interest rates were 0. But the yield on, let's say, a US government bond, which is supposedly risk-free because the US government should not default on their debt, has gone from 0. I think it was 0.06% on a 6-month last year, and we're now at 4.2, 4.3, something like that. So you can now get a bit of yield. Of course, it's harder in Cayman because if you were in the UK or in the US, you'd go online and you'd search all the different banks and you'd find the highest rate and you'd move your money there.
And it would take you about 30 minutes to open a new bank account.
Absolutely. And of course, the situation here is not quite so easy.
Yeah.
But there are things you can do. You can absolutely speak to your bank and you can say, I have, this money sitting in cash. What can I do to get a better yield?
Because I think it's true to say, from the research I had once done, almost every bank in Cayman offers a money market fund, which is investing in US government treasuries. And almost every bank in Cayman offers a savings account, which is in Cayman almost equivalent to a checking account because you can access it same day. So you can, although inflation is, let's call it 10% for round numbers, and you're losing 10% a year, but if you put your money in a savings account, you're only going to be losing 6% a year. Now, that's still terrible, but I guess it's better.
Absolutely, it's better.
Yeah.
And then the next step, as you alluded to a couple of minutes ago, is only if you have excess cash, which what I define by that is...
That's the question, yeah. What is excess cash?
Well,
Yes.
you have no short-term expensive debt. Mm-hmm. So you've paid off all your credit cards. You've got ideally no car loans, although car loans can be a lower rate than credit card. Boat loans, any other kind of short-term debt. Mortgage, I would think about differently. That's long-term debt. You've got none of that. You've got a cash buffer of, let's say, a minimum of 3 months of basic living costs, so that if something happened tomorrow and you lost your job or you got sick, you've got cash in the bank to live on. If you've ticked those 2 boxes, then you can start thinking, okay, I have some excess cash that I might be able to deploy and do something with for the longer term. Put it into that longer term bucket, money that you're going to try and forget about for hopefully, decades until you need it to live on later in life. That's when you can start thinking about putting money into what we call the stock market. And by the way, the stock market is a collection of the best businesses in the world. You're buying bits of businesses. That would be the time to think about that.
Before we go to the break, I want to begin the conversation on property, because a lot of people in Cayman use property as their long-term saving. And with interest rates having gone up as much as they have, that makes owning property very expensive. And there's, in normal, I'm going to say the word normal in inverted commas here, but in normal markets, rising interest rates tend to be associated with property prices coming under pressure, so declining. Do you think that's a worry in Cayman? Because it's not a normal property market, so that's why I put it in inverted commas in there.
Again, we're such a unique place here, aren't we? And yes, if you look at the US, then absolutely property prices have started to fall after rising a lot over the last couple of years, and people are starting to come under severe stress from their mortgage payments, which have gone up a lot. And if you translate that to Cayman, you would say, well, Cayman's going to see the same thing. But I'm not sure that's always been true. Again, I think it will be quite nuanced here what happens, because the top end of the market is probably going to react differently to the lower and mid end.
A lot of the top end perhaps is being bought with cash by people who have a spare couple of million.
Absolutely.
And an interest rate change makes no difference to them, in other words.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, look, let's take a brief break and then we'll come back, and I've got about 44 questions for you from people I've been speaking to who have specific questions about topics they want to bend your ear over. So let's take a brief break and then rejoin Georgie straight after.
Registration is now open for the 7th annual Meals on Wheels 5K Turkey Trot fundraising run walk. Come trot with us on Saturday, November 26th at Grand Ole House, South Church Street. There are great raffle prizes to be won, finisher medals, trophies, and complimentary continental breakfast to enjoy. Support Meals on Wheels in the fight to end senior hunger in the Cayman Islands. Register today online at www.mealsonwheels.ky or call 769-1974 for details on volunteering for this event. See you at the start line.
Radio Cayman, maintaining the innovation.
On a daily basis, making it easy to connect with you, our listeners. Add us to WhatsApp today, 925-3261. That's 925-3261.
Radio Cayman.
Send a text or voice note.
Can I send a request, please?
You don't really have to ask us. Just send a request.
This is a shout out to my ex.
Radio Cayman, the voice of the Cayman Islands.
Radio Cayman, maintaining the innovation.
Money Sense, the only personal finance radio show in the Cayman Islands, hosted by Simon Caudry from the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
This is Money Sense.
Welcome back to Money Sense and our conversation on personal finance with the wonderful Georgie, who I forgot to say, I wanted in my introduction actually to note that I've been reading a few of your articles of late. And they're on your website, libertywealth.ky. And I genuinely would encourage people, if you want to learn a little bit more about personal finance and also see some pictures which, well, just lovely pictures, some of them, of your family, always seemingly on the beach, which is always a nice place in Cayman to spend time. It's a very, very good way to just focus your mind on topics that are, I think I would describe it as important to be aware of. So just encourage people to check out your website for that particular purpose. Before we actually went to the break, though, we've touched on the subject of property, and it affects so many people in Cayman. Everyone in Cayman lives or rents a property. And a lot of people have used property as a tool for saving, a tool for long-term investing. And for the last 8 or 9 years, the cost of that tool has remained unchanged. But that's changed in the last 6 months. So where are we now, and how impactful is the rise in interest rates going to be for people?
Well, it's interesting you say the cost of that property has remained unchanged, because your interest payments on your mortgage might have remained unchanged, but of course there's other costs associated with owning a property. It's not just the bank that charges you. You may have strata payments. You certainly have upkeep. You may need to repaint your apartment or your house every now and then. You've definitely got to replace the AC and get that serviced. And those kind of
Don't
costs.
talk about AC costs.
Yeah, AC, isn't that the one? I mean, $5,000 on some AC part. Those kind of costs, I'm not sure, have stayed static because they would have gone up every year as the cost of living does go up every year. So actually, the cost of owning a property over time does go up. And the thing that you want to make sure about if you are owning a property as an investment, and I always say to people, don't think about your home as an investment. Your home is your home. You live in it. It's not an investment. It may ultimately be something that you can use to live on later in retirement if you decide to downsize. But it only becomes an investment if you can monetize it in some way. And while you're living in your house, it's not. So there's a difference between your home and then a property that you might have bought, sort of in inverted commas, as an investment. And with that property, what you really want to make sure is that as the cost of owning it goes up over time, your income that you generate from it goes up over time.
And rents in Cayman have traditionally trended upwards.
Well, have they? That would be an interesting... I don't actually know the data on this, Simon.
Well, there isn't a lot of good data there, but anecdotally it feels as though everyone complains about rents having gone up over time.
Yeah, I think they go up in fits and starts.
Fair point.
And I think a lot of people own an investment property and they say, oh, I have really nice tenants in there and they don't bother me. And so I've kept the rent the same for the last 5 years. And probably I should think about doing an increase. But, they're nice people. And I think back to when we moved here 15 years ago and where we rented. I'm not sure rents have gone up much actually over that period, although we arrived at a high because it was right after Ivan. So I'm doing a bit of data mining there. But you do want to make sure that your rental income is going up at least the same rate as the cost of the property is going up, because otherwise you're going backwards. If that's some income that you're going to live on in, let's say, retirement, then you want to make sure that your purchasing power is not going backwards over time.
That could be a difficult conversation to have with the tenants.
Absolutely.
But to your point, it still needs to be had. That's one element, of course. But what has remained constant is the cost of financing that property for almost, it seems, a decade. And I guess a lot of people have said, well, I'll buy this property, I'll mortgage at 80%, and that's going to remain the same cost for the next 20 years. And all of a sudden, it absolutely hasn't been.
And I think, again, people are seeing different things, because I think some of the banks have sort of automatically increased mortgage payments as rates have gone up, and some haven't. I think sometimes the banks have extended the length of the mortgage, so your payments might not have gone up that much on a monthly basis, but you're going to be paying it for a longer amount of time. You're going to be paying a lot more interest over that period. So again, that comes
to a question. So you're right. There are some quirks in the banking system here, whereby in a traditional market, automatically the interest rate goes up, and you'll still have a 20-year mortgage. Whereas here, sometimes the dollar amount that you pay each month remains constant, but you end up paying much, much more over time. Yep. If you have that extra amount of money to spend, not to spend, but if you have a little bit of savings and you see this happening to you, would you recommend that you actually keep the amount, increase the amount you pay each month in order to avoid that sort of problem? Or do you think it's actually helpful to extend the life of the mortgage in this scenario?
It's a good question. I think if the bank gives you the ability to extend the life of the mortgage and you're a little bit concerned about your cash flow.
So if you're in that margin of potentially being stretched.
Yes. I would take that and then try to stick to the payments so that you still get it paid off in, say, 20 years instead of 25. But what that extension does is just gives you that bit of freedom. If a year down the line you find yourself really stretched and you can't do it, then you can bring your payments down a little bit. But try, if you can, to stick to the original maturity of your loan so that you're not, say, still paying a mortgage when you're in your 70s.
Yeah, and you won't be potentially earning anywhere near what you might be earning today. Okay, and what about other forms of debt then? So one question I had from somebody was, I have a credit card, I have a car loan, I have my mortgage.
Everything's gone up.
Well, yes, totally. But we're coming to the time of year where traditionally people get their year-end bonus in January. Often people have looked at their year-end bonus and thought, oh, I'll go and buy another car or go and do something flash and exciting. What would be your general approach to using that money this time around, given where we are in the financial markets?
If your car's running, then don't buy a new car. Okay. That's the first thing. And secondly, I mean, if you've got debt and you're feeling overwhelmed by debt and you get, a bonus, then the sort of rational way to deal with it is just to look at the debt that you're paying the highest interest rate on, which is probably your credit card, and clear that. And
because that could be in the mid-20s right now.
It really could. Yeah. And cut it up after you've done it. Well, put it in the freezer.
Which I guess means, when you think about it, when you think about it, that means in less than 4 years, the amount of money you've got on it has doubled, which is an extraordinary terrible thing if you don't get rid of the debt associated with it.
And I think, just going back to interest rates, a really important point is that I think people in Cayman, again, because we live in this slightly insular community sometimes, I don't know that people are necessarily aware what's actually gone on with interest rates, because if they haven't seen their mortgage rate go up yet because the bank either hasn't adjusted or they've adjusted the maturity, people are not really aware that we've gone from prime at 3.25 a year ago, something in that region, to 7% today. Prime interest rate is 7% today. And if you're paying prime plus something, you're probably 8%, and we could be at 10% in the next couple of months. That's a huge increase.
Absolutely. Which leads on to another question, actually, about setting financial goals. A lot of people won't have ever set financial goals, and almost certainly the best way to go about that is to have a conversation with a professional to help you do that. But I presume there are some things that you'd want, before someone comes and speaks with you, presumably there would be things that you would, in an ideal world, they would have thought about themselves, and they would have therefore come to you with, oh, here are the issues, as opposed to, I don't know what my issues are. So what sort of things should people be trying to think about in order to better structure, better organise their financial mind?
Do you know, the biggest question that we get when people come in is, we've got cash in the bank and we don't know what to do with it. Should we pay off our mortgage or put some into a mortgage, or should we invest? I think that's people's biggest question right now. And again, a year ago, that was quite easy question to answer because rates were so low that for most people, it made sense to put a bit of money into the markets. Whereas now, when people are paying more in their mortgages, you can put your money into your mortgage and sort of get a guaranteed, let's say, 7% return, maybe 8% return versus an unknown return in the markets. And of course, markets are low right now, which means that the long-term returns have gone up from here. It's very counterintuitive.
It feels scary, though.
It feels scary, but it's safer.
Yeah.
It's safer to invest now than it was a year ago, despite the fact that it feels really, really risky. Everything about investing is so counterintuitive, isn't it? When it feels safe, it's normally risky, and when it feels risky, it's normally safe. So we're down. What are we down now, Simon? More than 20% on the S&P.
Yes.
And we've hit almost 30% down.
Yeah.
6 weeks ago or 2 months ago. So it's safer today than it was a year ago. Long-term returns are higher from here than they were. So I say to most people, you can probably do a bit of both. If you've got some cash in the bank, balance it. Put some into your mortgage, and if you can, up your monthly mortgage payments a bit so you're overpaying your mortgage and you'll get it paid off quicker, and put some into the markets. That's the biggest question we're seeing right now.
Which leads in a wonderful segue to a question I've wanted to ask you. I guess people might respond to that observation with, but the government now makes me contribute again to my pension. So I'm doing my long-term investing. So why do I need to do any more?
That's a good one. Well, you're not doing enough.
Okay.
That's the problem with a Cayman pension, unfortunately. It's 10% of a capped amount, 87,000 CI right now. If you earn more than 87,000 CI a year, you're probably not putting anywhere like 10% unless your employer's overpaying and you're overpaying, which is quite unusual. There are some firms that do it, but not many. So you may only be paying 6 or 7% of your income into a pension, and that is just, it's not enough. It's never going to be enough.
Let's say you're earning less than 87, though. Is 10% enough?
Probably not. It depends when you started. If you are in your early 20s and you're just entering the workforce and you do that all the way through your career, possibly. Most experts would probably say still not quite enough. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that didn't start in their 20s because the pension plans haven't been around for that long. So if you didn't start until you were in your 40s or maybe even your 50s, and that's all you've done, then unfortunately there's not going to be enough in the pot for you to have a comfortable retirement and stay comfortably retired.
And given where I guess the other side of it, given where we are in terms of markets, now may not be a bad time if you wanted to top up and put more money into your pension. Because the one advantage it has, although it seems counterintuitive to say, but the one advantage the pension system has here in Cayman is that you can't easily get the money out. So it does force you to keep it in there.
Absolutely. It does force you to keep it in there. And you can get it out, your voluntary contributions, at retirement. And you can get it out for a few other reasons before retirement. But I think behaviourally, there is a very, very good argument for putting money into a Cayman pension because it does limit your ability to pull it out and spend it on something that you maybe ought not be spending it on.
Something more luxurious than you should be.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to do, I think we've got time for one more question, which is, I guess it's almost impossible to really answer, but I want to throw it at you. How do people stick to their budgets? What's the best way of self-motivating oneself to be disciplined?
Oh, Simon, it's the same as how do we stick to a diet, isn't it?
Why are you looking at me like that? What are you suggesting?
I always joke that, if this stuff was easy, we'd all be rich and skinny.
Yeah.
Diet and exercise and money are very much the same things, and it's really hard. And that is partly the role of a real financial advisor, is to help you behaviourally to stick to the things that you know you need to do. But you've got to hold yourself accountable, or have someone else hold you accountable. Get a friend to hold you accountable, or a family member for the things that you said you would do with your money.
It's difficult sticking to a diet in the same way it's difficult to stick to a financial budget, though, because you see other people spending money freely, you see other people eating out freely and having fun doing it, and you're then not spending money on that new shiny object, or you're not going out to that nice restaurant and enjoying a nice dinner. It's not easy, though, is it? It's
not easy. We always say, well, somebody much wiser than me once said, wealth is what you don't see, which is very powerful. Okay. It's all the stuff you don't see. When you see people driving the fancy car and living in the big house, you don't actually see real wealth. You just see money having been spent. The real wealth is all the things you don't see. It's the retirement account that's fully funded. It's the cash in the bank. It's the lack of debt. It's the house that's fully paid off. You don't see that stuff. We don't walk around with that on our forehead. done this.
And if I can put end on a slightly philosophical point, one of the things we often don't do enough of is you make use of the free things there are in Cayman to do, the beach, the water.
Absolutely. There's
we
lots of
want to
ways.
buy objects, but we don't necessarily maximise the value or the satisfaction we could get from what we have for free here in Cayman.
Great point, Simon.
Well, look at that. Me ending on a philosophical note, which has our producer nervous and anxious. Georgie, it has been an immense pleasure having you joining us on the show this morning. Thank you very much, and may we hopefully reconvene in a shorter than 8-month period of time again.
I would love that, Simon.
Excellent. Well, look, a final note to remind all our listeners is that this show will be available on YouTube to be viewed, and also on our CFA Society webpage. If you have any questions or topics you want us to consider, please email us at moneysense@candw.ky or tweet us at MoneySense Radio. With that, thank you once again, and please do tune into Money Sense in 2 weeks' time.